Aloha mai kako e nā hoa makamaka. My name is Halena Kapuni-Reynolds, and I will be your host this afternoon. I am Kanaka Oiwi, born and raised on the island of Hawaii in the Ahupua'a of Waiakea and Ola'a, and I currently have the honor of serving as the board member of the Hawaii Museums Association. I'm also a PhD student in American Studies at the University of Hawaii at Manoa and work in the Museum Studies Graduate Certificate Program as a graduate assistant. Today, we are excited to have all of you here for the first of 3 webinars on Mākau Moʻomeheu, or cultural competence. Our goal through these programs is to provide cultural competency training across the Hawaiian Islands for professionals and volunteers working in Hawaii's heritage sector. More specifically, we want to equip participants with the knowledge and skill to better understand and respectfully interpret Native Hawaiian culture through consultation and collaboration with cultural practitioners and knowledge holders. In a time when local scholars, economic experts, tourism authorities, politicians, and community members are re-envisioning Hawaii's economy as one that could be built on aloha aina and stewardship, so too must museums and related institutions adapt to meet the demands of 21st century Hawaii. For these reasons, the Hawaii Museums Association, with sponsorship from the Hawaii Tourism Authority, the East-West Center, and the Museum Studies Graduate Certificate Program at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, has organized these webinars to cultivate meaningful dialogue and relationships between heritage professionals and the Hawaiian community. Such conversations and collaboration are crucial for ensuring that museums and related organizations continue to be viewed by most of the public as sites of historical truth. If you find this webinar or any of our future events to be useful, then you might also consider supporting the Hawaii Museums Association further by becoming a member. And to learn more about that, you can visit our website at hawaiimuseums.org. Today's webinar comprises of 2 components. The first is a panel presentation on cultural competency in theory and practice, and it'll feature presentations by local cultural competency educators Helen Wong Smith, Dr. Tarisi Vunidilo, and Halena Kapuni-Reynolds. The second is a conversation with our local cultural practitioners and Hawaiian heritage professionals on their work to honor, preserve, and perpetuate Native Hawaiian culture, cultural practices, and their experience collaborating with museums. In their discussions, they will share insight into how museums can build better relationships with cultural practitioners, support the communities they serve, and do their part in perpetuating and nurturing Hawaiian culture by working with cultural practitioners in both interpretation and stewardship. Both panels include time for questions and answers at the end of the panel. And if you have any questions, you can either submit them through the chat box, or we'll have a little bit of time for an open Q&A. Since there will be a short break in between sessions, we want to encourage all of you to make yourself comfortable and to excuse yourself when needed. So take the time, make sure that your video is you stop your video, because we don't want to see where you're going when you go on your break. But please feel free to grab some water or use the restroom whenever you need to. Now today, let us turn to our first set of panelists. Our first panelist is Helen Wong Smith, who is the archivist for university records at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. She has over 35 years experience in library and archival collections in Hawaii, with a BA in Hawaiian Studies and MLIS from the University of Hawaii at Manoa. She has held numerous positions, including Hawaiian Collections Librarian at UH Hilo, lead archivist for the Pacific Island Network of the National Park Service, historical/cultural specialist for the Land Assets Division of Kamehameha Schools, and librarian/archivist for the State Historic Preservation Division. Helen has been sharing how cultural competency can advance the archival profession since 2015 across the country, including an invitation by Harvard University in November 12, 2019. Elected president of Hawaiian Library Association, the Hawaiian Historical Society, and twice of the Association of Hawaii Archivists, she is the recipient of the Agnes C. Conrad Award and was named a Distinguished Fellow of the Society of American Archivists in 2016. Our second panelist is Tarisi Vunidilo, Dr. Tarisi Vunidilo. Tarisi has an MSc in Anthropology and a postgraduate diploma in Māori and Pacific Development from the University of Waikato, Hamilton, New Zealand, a postgraduate diploma in Arts, majoring in Archaeology, Australia, from the Australian National University in Canberra, and a BA in Geography, History, and Sociology from the University of South Pacific in Suva, Fiji. She has published 2 books and several articles about Fijian pottery, language, and archaeology. She was Programs Advisor, Pacific Art of the Pacific Arts, Creative New Zealand from 2007 through 2009, the Collection Services Manager at the Waikato Museum of Art and History from 2003 to 2007, a Collection Manager of the Pacific Collections at Te Papa Tongarewa in New Zealand, and Director from 2000 and 2001, an archaeologist and head of the Archaeology Department from 1997 through 2000, and graduate trainee in the Archaeology Department from 1994 to 1996 at the Fiji Museum. She is currently volunteering as Secretary General for the Pacific Islands Museum Association and works between her office in Port Vila, Vanuatu, and Hilo, Hawaii. She completed her PhD in Pacific Studies in January 2016 on the topic of Iau Vakaviti, Fijian Treasures, Cultural Rights, and Repatriation on Cultural Materials from International Museums at the Center of Pacific Island Studies at the University of Auckland. She was a professional teaching fellow and lecturer at the University of Auckland from 2012 to May 2018 before taking up her new role as assistant professor in anthropology at the University of Hawaii at Hilo in August 2018. And our last panelist, me, I'm currently a PhD student in American Studies and Museum Studies at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, and I was raised in the Hawaiian homestead of Keaukaha on Hawaiʻi Island. And I have a BA in Anthropology and Hawaiian Studies from the University of Hawaii at Hilo, as well as an MA in Anthropology with a focus on Museum and Heritage Studies from the University of Denver. Without further ado, please welcome our panelists. And one more note before we begin, if you are not a speaker, please mute your audio because this will ensure that the audio is clear. Okay, so Helen.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
No, okay. Oh, fantastic. Okay, we're good. Thank you, UH, for the external. Okay, now, Helena, I'm trying to share my screen. You need to allow me to do so. It says host disabled participant from screen sharing. So as soon as you allow me to share my screen, I will go to my PowerPoint.
You should be good to go.
Okay. Woohoo! Look at us. All righty. Let's go. Here we go. Everybody can see this? Okay, I'm assuming that everybody can see this, my slides?
Yes, can see.
Fantastic. All right. Mahalo so much, and thank you all for putting up with the technical difficulties. Our first time, so this is where we're going. Okay, so Helena mentioned a little bit about what cultural competency is. I'd like to say that when you grow up in Hawaii, you are pretty much innate. It's innate because we have to deal with so many different types of cultures, and it almost comes naturally to us. But often, and the reason I give this a work day, I give a full day workshop on this across the America, is because they're not as ma'a to it as some of us are. But let me go over this so it comes home, is that it's the ability to function with awareness and all of these other skill sets when you are dealing with people who are unlike yourself. They have different backgrounds and such. So basically, cultural competency is offered as a framework for equity, diversity, and inclusion. This is a methodology that you can use, but it is very useful in order to apply it toward diversity. So what should it do? It should allow cultural mindedness. And there's all kinds of different terms for it nowadays. They say intercultural competency, they say cultural sensitivity, they use all these different terms nowadays. But I'm just going to stick with cultural competency because that's what I had learned, and you can use it almost interchangeably. But it's it's a tool that we can use when dealing with people unlike ourselves. And when some of us who are as old and have been around as a few of us on this call have been, we have seen the shift. We have seen the shift in what is accepted, and then what's in vogue and what's kind of gone out of vogue, and now it's different. But what I'd like to ask, especially the younger professionals and the younger people, is that remember you are of a different culture than we are, even if with ageism going on, and be kind to us. Okay, so um, it's being adopted in many. It started off actually in the medical field and coaching and things like that. But it's really taken off in other fields like archival and librarianship, and even the American Association of Museums has adopted it. So they have a full-on training, and they recognize that it improves services to museums, and it helps museums in their services to others, to other stakeholders and such. So there are, it's been accepted by the museum profession, and so it's something that is universally useful. So let's define culture. Well, sadly, this is a definition that is a no-no. World Health Organization, you don't never use the word that you're defining in your definition, but that's what the World Health WHO did. But what it is that it's shared actions that are expressed. Oh, look at my typo. Expressed daily, that are transmitted through cultures and traditions. Now, not all of that is visible. So you have to remember that many of you might have seen the iceberg graphic where you see culture, the obvious things above the water that has, dress or music or foods, but it's the things below the waterline that are going to impact, I think, a lot of what you're going to be dealing with, what you deal with every day. So not only with your own staff and your patrons, but also with your stakeholders, and people come from very different backgrounds. And unfortunately, in our world, many times we have people come from outside of Hawaii and come here and run our repositories and don't have a good sense of the culture that they are working with today. So think about the different diversity of human experience. So you have all these different experiences, your working conditions, and often those experiences shape social and cultural groups. So many times people are not aware that their employee might be homeless or has a very volatile home experiences, that they're always looking for another place, and that might be why they're um, not on work on time. I once had an intern from Ni'ihau when I was at the Kauai Historical Society, and all of a sudden she just didn't show up for work. And when the next time she came in, I said, "Are you okay? What were you?" She goes, "Oh yeah, my auntie wanted me to help her." I'm like, I'm not gonna get all over her and say, "Hey, honey, in this world, you gotta call." I totally understand. In her culture, auntie needed her help. Family came first. I'm not gonna ding her for that. So these are the types of things that this is just part of the examples that I wanted to share with you, to think about different cultures. And this is something that I always love to put up, and I don't know if you can read it. They learn how to say gracias, and we're supposed to be thankful. Oh my God, so many times has that happened in Hawaii, right? You have somebody who comes in and they just learn, they read Shoal of Times. Hey, they don't know all about Hawaii. So this is the kind of stuff that I like people to realize, that is not cultural competency. What also is not cultural competency is to do outreach to a organization or Hawaiian charter school or something. And, oh, we did outreach to them. We've never done that before. We're culturally competent. No, you're not. That's just cultural. That's just outreach. Okay. Cultural competency is a range. It's a continuum. And this continuum, it's a formative assessment. It starts off as a formative assessment, which is ongoing. And it'll also often place you in an uncomfortable position. So nobody, when I give my workshop, I never have people take a pre-test and say, I dislike people who are unlike me. Who's going to admit that? Who is going to say, yes, I do not want to work with people who are, not of my background or not of my education or what have you? Nobody's going to admit that. So there are other ways for you to become aware how uncomfortable you might be. And often it starts off with conflict, sadly. But my friend Manu Meyer, who I adore, and we worked at Napono EL together, and she went on to Harvard. I had a second child. She says conflict is the midwife of clarity. So sometimes it has to start with this conflict, and even within an institutional setting, it's often there's a there's a balance, and then somebody new comes in of a different culture, and this is the kind of stuff that you have to face. So there are three aspects toward interactive, effective interaction with difference, and this is what it's three-legged stool. You have to have the awareness. You have to have the awareness of what your point of view has been or is, and then you have to be willing to be empathetic with the other person, even if you don't understand where they're coming from. And then it's brought on with the curiosity. So the curiosity, if you're willing to have that curiosity, like, I wonder why they did that. Delve into it. Figure out what it might be. So here I'm quoting Manu again. And if I don't have any tattoos, but if I did, this is what I would put on my arm. If knowledge is power, understanding is revelation. We all know that knowledge is power, but it's that understanding and empathizing that's going to make the difference and make you more culturally competent. So, for instance, this is a really good example. The Arab American National Museum was created after 9/11, and they felt there was a need. Most people didn't understand their culture. They were being targeted, being stereotyped and such. And so they created that. And when they had this museum established, they were smart enough to have cultural competency programs tailored to meet to each group. And this is a beautiful thing. Once the Association of Hawaii Archivists went to Kauai, that's all I'll say. I'm not going to say the institution. And the tour guide who was taking us around didn't figure out who we were. She didn't bother to find out who her audience was. And she was treating us, she was telling us things like the most basic facts of Hawaiian history. And this is a bunch of archivists, including people like Mary Judd and, the Rath, Paula Rath, and, and Agnes Conrad, and all these people that know much more than she did. But what the Arab American National Museum is, in addition of knowing their audience, they tailored it for what are their needs. So if you're a senior citizen, you may have want to know different things about the Arab Americans, in opposed to business executives like, okay, well, how is this going to be my bottom line? Or teachers, how are they going to translate this information to younger children or something like that? So they tailor to meet each group, and I highly recommend you to consider that as well. So it's an active process. And what I want you to get most from this slide is that use an EMEC contextualization, not an ETEC. So what it is that if you want to know about a particular culture, go to someone from that culture, learn from it from within. And that's why we have 3 cultural practitioners with you today, because you don't want to read about that particular culture through an outsider's eyes. Not necessarily, I'm not going to say anthropologic, because sometimes you can be within that culture. But this is something to realize it's an active process. There's no end point. You don't say, okay, now I know everything about that culture. Somebody on the mainland, archive leader on the mainland, was in Las Vegas. She used to work at the University UNLV. And she said, oh, we know all about Asians. We have a large Vietnamese population. I'm like, no, you do not know all about all Asians that way. So it never ends. So it does start off at the person. This is why I don't like policies for institutions that say we are diverse and we embrace diversity and all that, because if it doesn't start at the individual basis, it's not going to go anywhere. It's just wow, 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 wow. So this is it starts when you understand your own diversity, how you interact with others, and then the growth of respect between individuals occurs, and it gets up to the higher level. So very quickly, because we're already late, there are 4 skills of cultural competency. And so there's understanding culture as multi-level, multi-dimensional, subcultures and all, and then the the 6 barriers that might prevent you, and those are often nonverbal, judgment, stress. If you're under stress, it's hard to have that relationship building, discrimination, stereotyping, and sometimes institutional-wide barriers. It was sometimes the institution itself is prevents people from mixing cultures. And when I was at a particular library, I was shocked to learn that the professionals didn't even eat lunch with the paraprofessionals. I'm like, wow, how stupid is that? But these are the types of things that you have to recognize. And so if you have this, you're going to recognize that culture at a personal level. So one's personal identity is formed through interacting with one's own social group. And we all know that how we act is changes with whatever group we're in. You may act differently with your church group as you would at the office, or in your halal in opposed to someplace else. And people always think of culture as ethnicity. It's not just ethnicity. It's only one influence on a person's identity. And sometimes, like many of us are poi dogs, we have so many different ethnicities that different times of our life we may identify with one more than the other. And so other influences include age, gender, physical appearance, and sexual orientation, social economic position. All of those things are part of one's own personal identity. And so when I talk about the 6 barriers, that can include vocal cues, eye contact and such. Sometimes there's overgeneralization, that's stereotypes, and that provides psychological permission for discrimination. And I've seen that all too often. Negative thoughts and feelings that accompany stereotypes. So, these are all the types of things that are going on all the time, that sometimes it's so innate that we have to catch ourselves from doing it. And also, so, if there's discomfort dealing with culturally diverse situations, that gives you a clue. Helena, how much time do I have left?
You have about 10 minutes.
10? Okay, so what are we going to do? Why do we want to do this? Because the outcomes would be to recognize that there are different ways of thinking and communicating. They will recognize culture is multi-level and dimensional, and then the 6 barriers. When I was with the Park Service, I remember somebody had gone down to Samoa before I did, and she said, "Oh, it was so hard." I mean, she's not from Hawaii, and she said, "Oh, it's so hard." He would pick up, this paraprofessional would pick up everything and look at it slowly and take his time. And she goes, "Oh, I just wanted to go in and go." I thought, well, yes, you're not of this culture, and you know what? His work was spotless. It's because he took his time, but it was a difference in work procedures that she was not being culturally competent about. So number 3 and 4 are to practice the culturally centered communication. And this is where it gets tricky, right? This is the conflict recovery. People always say, "Oh, we have ho'oponopono." Well, how many people actually practice ho'oponopono? And even if you insist on having ho'oponopono, the other people are not, if you have people in that group who are not comfortable with that, and you go through the motions, and they don't accept it, and they don't understand the reason you're recommending this, it's not going to resolve anything. So it's very difficult to, 2 things that drive me nuts: cultural appropriation and imposing some practice without everyone understanding the desire and the intent. So these are some things. So when you're practicing culturally centered communication skills, these are just some of the things I'd like you to be cognizant of. And this will allow personal competency behaviors and dialogue, and all these things will come in play. So this is easier read or said than done, but too often, because we're so busy, we're trying to get things going, we don't stop and observe attentively. We don't pay attention to not just the other person's thoughts and feelings, but our own. How are you reacting to something? So this is what I was talking about earlier, where in an organization-wide or institution-wide, you have this relative equilibrium, and then something um, changes, like you may all of a sudden have an increase in employee diversity, or you may have different types of patrons wanting to come in. And it's so sad, because so often I see, especially trying to get local people into repositories, they just don't even think about this. They go, oh, that's for the tourists, that's for the holidays, they're the only ones who go. And I working my life to break that attitude down. So if we're not accepting of them, then this is not going to come to pass. So there's a couple things I want to point out within the organization strategies. There are the internal, and there's a lot of literature written about how people of color can't get promoted or get tenure because they have their activities are not under the rubric of what would qualify them for promotion or tenure, or whether they're doing is not recognized by the dominant Western culture. So in your internal strategies, I encourage you to consider this type of some of these things. And then external would be establish relationships with different clients and communities, and review the ethics and social responsibility of organizations. There's a really good little vignette when I was an advisor at the Archives Leadership Institute in Purdue. We did a skit on cultural competency in a museum. And if you just go on YouTube and you type in cultural competency, Archives Leadership Institute at Purdue, you'll come up. And it's a really good example of how a museum that has a collection of this particular culture, but even when someone from that culture comes in and says, you have this exhibit wrong, and they go, what do you know? We're the experts. This is our collection. So these are the kinds of things that I encourage you. And, you have the benefit, other than outside of archives, we have paper, it's not that sexy. Archives have the benefit of having artifacts. And so there's a whole realm of literature on using historical artifacts to teach cultural competency. What's more personal than having the pipe, used by somebody? I know when Janet Zisk was the archivist at Kamehameha Schools, she would take to the classroom one of Pauahi's bowls. I wouldn't call it a calabash. It was a small bowl that she could take on the plane with her. And I talked to kids who saw it and held it when they were in the kindergarten, and they still remember it in their 30s, because it was something and it connected them with Pauahi. So it starts with listening. We should not, come to a community or your patrons with a patriarchal patronizing attitude. You have to have community partners, which Tarisi will talk about. Give donors and researchers space. I took a group of Hawaiian translators to the East Coast to look at their archives at Harvard and Smithsonian. And when we're at the National Archives and Records Administration, here's Puakea here, and here's, these other translators, his students. And they're working together at a table, and one of the girls kicked off her boots under the table, and one of the NARA employees came rushing up and said, whose boots are those? And she goes, they're mine. He goes, keep your footwear on. And they were like, what? It wasn't hurting anybody. Culturally different, okay? So recognize the community, the patrons that are coming in, the cultural practitioners will be talking about, recognize them as experts and, and as an asset in regard to your work. Okay, mahalo.
Thank you very much, Helen, for that wonderful presentation. Okay, now I will pull up Tarisi's presentation. Tarisi, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Wonderful. So let me and we will begin. Okay, all set?
All set. Very good. Thank you so much. Bulavinaka and aloha to everyone who's listening in today. Really appreciate taking your time away from your busy schedule to join us on this inaugural webinar. Also acknowledging the sponsors, the Hawaiʻi Museum Association, Hawaii Tourism Association, East West Center, and of course the University of Hawaii Manoa Museum Studies Graduate Certificate Program. With their support, we're able to be delivering this very, very special workshop. And mahalo nui, Helen, for passing the baton on. Thank you so much. Now, I will be adding another layer to Helen's amazing presentation, where I will be taking you on a free tour to the Pacific. So we will travel across the Pacific, where I will be applying the Talanoa methodology, where I will be sharing with you some of the wonderful work that we have done already in the area of cultural competency. But then again, we have to remember that it doesn't end there. We can always improve and empower other museums around the world to work better with our Pacific collections. And also I wear the hat of the Pacific Islands Museum Association, PIMA, which is a sister organization to the Hawaii Museum Association. So I acknowledge the president, Joseph Cameron in Guam, and all the wonderful board members all across the Pacific who will be listening in on the replay of our webinar. And for today, I have decided just to share 3 C's in our Talanoa. I want to add 6 and 9 and 12, but I thought I will go over time. So I will stay with 3. So the 3 C's, as you can see on the slide, is community. The second one is culture. The third one is collaboration. And as Helen has mentioned earlier on, community partnership is very much the essence of what I will be sharing with you today. And the case study that I will be talking about is the Pacific Collections Access Project, PCAP in short, which was a wonderful project that was delivered from 2016 to 2019 at the Auckland Museum in Aotearoa. And so when it comes to these 3 words, so for me as a Pacific Islander, when I'm referring to what the word community is, for those of you who are working with Pacific collections, this is kind of very important for you to look at what encompasses the Oceania region. And also the most important thing is he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. Who are the people behind these amazing taonga, these treasures? So again, learning more about these people, more than what the artifacts are in front of you. And of course, collaboration, working together with the community is the way forward. Now, to kickstart my Talanoa with you, I decided just to bring 7 key actions for collections managers that are looking after Pacific collections all around the world. The number one, which is very important, and I also speak from experience about this, is no one size fits all. I think a lot of museums and a lot of universities, they often just clump the Pacific as one. And that can be quite, yeah, it's not easy, and it can present a very false way of looking at the region. As you all know, I think most of you on the webinar today, the Oceania of the Pacific is very diverse. And that comes to the second point. You must familiarize yourself with the region. Number 3, learn the geography and learn the island names. So if you are looking at artifacts, that says Papua New Guinea, try and find out where Papua New Guinea is. Find out how many islands do they have? How many languages do they have? So it's really kind of encouraging all of us who work in the museum to get out of our comfort zone. And that will make your work enjoyable because you're going to learn so much as well as a result of that. Number 4, be familiar with the cultures of the people. In my case, as a Fijian, I cannot just wear the lens of a Fijian and try and study the Hawaiians or try and look at the Papua New Guineans. So you really have to get outside your comfort zone in order to learn and appreciate the culture that you're looking at. Number 5, this is an interesting one. Find out if these communities are in your neighborhood. And I can say maybe 99.9%, some of these people maybe are your neighbors. And if they're there, talanoa with them, invite them in. As come to point number 6, invite them through to the museum to be part of some cultural programs and tours, or encourage your local community members to co-create, to collaborate with your programs. And you'll be amazed when you will be actually bringing in audiences and people that will never ever imagine to come through the museum. And I will be sharing some examples of that later on. And number 7 is, again, collaborate and work with your community members. You will be amazed with, maybe you may be thinking of your project in that like a little box, but after working with community members and making them the knowledge holders, making them the experts, that's when you realize that the box is bigger than what you created in the first place. So I hope that 7 key actions will take us further on in the work in front of us. And now with the Pacific, and this is something I do with my students in Aotearoa and here in Hawaii. Some of them are listening in today. In every first class of my lectures, I often do a map test, a test of how much they know of the Pacific region. Often do the test in the beginning, and then I give another test at the end so that they are familiar with all these different islands. So it comes back to the point number 1 that I shared before, that no one size fits all. It's very important for us to know the diversity and celebrate the diversity, because the diversity, it makes these communities special. So if you see on this map, I'm from Fiji, so it's right there in the middle. People often say that we are the center of the universe, so I'll say it now. And I used to live in Aotearoa, New Zealand, so it's down south there. And of course, now I live in Hawaii. So the examples that I will share with you today very quickly will be from Fiji. I didn't have a PowerPoint to share, but I'll just share verbally with you 2 projects that I was part of that kind of like, makes what Helen just talked about come alive. One experience that I was part of was an exhibition in Fiji. This is taking us to the Fiji Museum. So you'll see Fiji there. So virtually we're traveling there. There was an amazing Fiji artist, very creative, self-taught. His name was William Bakalevu. And I remember this moment very well when our director, Kate Vusoniwelala, I want to acknowledge this woman as well, who was a game changer in the field of cultural competencies and breaking those barriers in working in museums. I remembered she called me into her office and she said, Tarisi, you're going to Threelegged. This is to one province on the main island of Vitilevu. And I said, what do you want me to do? And she said, you have to go and interview William Bakalevu. So I had to travel over to his village. He was actually working and painting in his village, a couple of kilometers away from Suva. Anyway, went over and talked to him. I didn't go once, I didn't go twice. I think I went over 5 times just to go and talk to him and interview him and just to get to understand him a little bit more. Fast forward, his exhibition opening was one of the most memorable exhibition I've ever remembered at the Fiji Museum, because he brought his whole village with him. The Fiji Museum had to fork out money to pay for trucks to bring all his relatives in the trucks to the Fiji Museum for the opening. And then also the food that they prepared was very much, from where he's from. We had cover, of course, and music. So that is just one example of what Kate Wusoniwilala did, was rather than just inviting William to the museum, which usually many museums do that, she sent me over to his village to actually see him where he lived. So that was kind of one example of working with practitioners, getting myself out of my comfort zone and going over and learning more about this gentleman and his ohana and his family. That was amazing. The second example from the Fiji Museum was the creation of the Indo-Fijian Gallery. It's one of my favorite galleries at the Fiji Museum. One thing that happened with the Fiji Museum is that we didn't have a lot of Indian artifacts. As most of you know, with Fiji, we have a lot of indigenous Fijians and our cousins and brothers and sisters from India who came over to Fiji in 1879 as part of our colonial history. So what Kate Wusoniwilala did, which was amazing, was that she invited our Indo-Fijian staff who can speak the language. Now, language is another important point when it comes to working with museums. They went out and who spoke the language, and they collected amazing artifacts. And what was amazing about this exhibition, you can hear the voices of our Indo-Fijian people in this gallery. So that was, again, another tech that Kate Wusoniwilala did for the example from the Fiji Museum. Now, quickly to Aotearoa, one example I want to share very quickly is in the Waikato Museum of Art and History in Hamilton. Kate Wusoniwilala, the same woman I'm talking about, ended up in Aotearoa becoming the director of the Waikato Museum, and we both worked together there. She came up with a concept called Cultural Days. So what happened is she wanted to work with ethnic groups in the Waikato region. And one thing I would admired about her was that she actually included a community rep in the committee. So that was amazing. And it really made the work very culturally safe. And we had a genuine voice in the exhibition. Just to give you some examples, we had an exhibition representing the Somalia community. We also had an exhibition representing the Korean community, the Indian community, as well as the Tangata Whenua, the Maoris of Aotearoa, and their exhibition as well. And some of this exhibition I've just talked about got a national award and recognition. And that is, again, another example of how museum directors and museum curators and museum collections managers, we can create new avenues of relationship buildings with our ethnic community. Yes, it can be done. So thank you. Now we're gonna go to the next slide. So now we're gonna travel, well, still in Aotearoa, to the Auckland Museum. Now I have a video. It's 5 minutes long. We will watch it at the end. Is that okay, Halena? If we can make it as my conclusion, because it'll sum up what I'm trying to share today. Mahalo nui. So this amazing project here, PCAP, Pacific Collections Access Project, it started in 2016 and 2019 to improve knowledge and understanding of the Auckland Museum Pacific Collections. And the main aim of this project is to open access. That was amazing. Open access to the collections to create a stronger link with the Pacific communities in Auckland. As you all know, Auckland is one of the largest Polynesian cities in the world, and we have the best Pacific collections in the Auckland Museum. So it makes sense that the Pacific people there should know that they have their collections and treasures in the museum. Apparently, it wasn't like that before, but this project opened a lot of opportunities. Now, for the Fiji project, we had to go through 1,500 objects. So it took us one whole year, October 2016 to 2017, to go through all the Fijian artifacts. So it includes musical instruments, weapons, textiles, carvings, tools, and ornaments. And the benefit of it came through this way. The collections became much better known among the Pacific people. Many of them, even the Fijians, when I told them, hey, did you know that your artifact from your village is at the Auckland Museum? They were like, what? What is it doing there? And then, so there was a lot of confusion. And some of them said, oh, where's the Auckland Museum? And I said, how many years have you been living in Auckland? Oh, 20 years. Hello, the Auckland Museum is right over there. So it was a real eye-opener, both for the museum and for the Pacific communities. And secondly, this project allowed for the museum to care for the collections even more. The 1,500 objects that the Fijians looked through, they were all thoroughly looked through, photographed, conserved, relabeled, and renamed. So I'll give you some examples at the end where some of our artifacts were, for example, water vessel, Fiji. Right? Can you hear me? Water vessel, Fiji. But did you know that we have the Fijian word for water vessels? So the Fijians came on board and renamed these artifacts. So I will show you some examples of what they look like now. So it was really, really good to see that there was access to the Pacific collection on site, off site, and online. Our project really moved across the world. When we were doing this project, we were, you can go through the next images, Halena. We were able to reach out to Fijians all over the world. And we were allowed to use social media, which was like, you know, amazing. I was so happy because I could take photos and upload it and then got feedback from people. So I have to really acknowledge the staff of the Auckland Museum, Jamie Williams, Fulimaro Pereira, Kolokesa Mahina Tuai, Sabina, Valeria, amazing conservators, Juliana Dale, Leone, Semu, and I think we also worked with my sister Sarah Bishop, who's from Hawaii. And it was really amazing that she was Hawaiian, working with Aotearoa. Now I've moved to Hawaii and now talking about the amazing work that we did together over there. So the amazing work has now allowed Fijians, I think we got a couple of thousands of Fijians actually went through the door for the whole 3 years, yeah, or 1 year that we worked there. So this is an example of what our invitation to the Fijians looked like. It wasn't easy to work with Fijians because there was a lot of us, and so we were talking with each other. To my two other colleagues, Chowana Monolang and Alipati Trail, my two amazing colleagues that we worked together, because we sat down and be like, how can we reach out to our Fijians? And so we decided to use a confederacy. So Fiji, we have 3 confederacies, Kumbuna, Burimbasanga, and Tovata. So every Fijian is born to one of these confederacy. And so there's one example here, the Tovata. And so we created a Tovata Day where we ate and danced and opened the collections and do a lot of amazing things on this particular day. And I think we got, over 300 to 500 people in the museum on this particular day. So it was really, really a very fascinating project to work with, which is kind of demonstrating what cultural competency is all about, empowering you listeners what you can do with your collections. Yes, and so what we did is, remember I mentioned about the language? So what the Auckland Museum did was to have indigenous names to represent the project. So rather than just calling PCAP, Pacific Collections Access Project, we had to name it in Fijian. So this is how we named it, Na Yau Wakaviti Na Ka Marangeti, which is translated as Fijian treasures that are treasured. And so we were able to reach across Fijians, across New Zealand, both young and old, as well as internationally. And this handsome little boy is Catherine Scott Matamua's son. And apparently he's Tongan with Fijian ancestry. So this was another interesting result that happened from this project, was that it didn't only bring Fijians, it also brought those who have lineages to Fiji, including Tonga. So I'll be sharing with you some of the pictures here. Getting all the community leaders coming in. And I think that's where collaboration was important. So the Auckland Museum did not just sit separately from the Fijian community. Kolokesa Mahina Tuai, Fulimalo Pereira, and the staff of the museum came across and worked with myself, Choana Monolangi, and Albert Trail to reach out to our community. So I'll be sharing with you some photos of what actually happened on some of our events. Okay, so that's the Albert Trail and Choana Monolangi. And on the right-hand side is Ebony, who also has ancestry to Fiji. Now, one thing that happened, which I think Helen mentioned it a little bit about archives, was that this project, even though we were in the museum dealing with artifacts, it also brought in the photography department. They also had photographs that needs to be identified. And so when we had, Kumbuna Day and Bulimbasanga Day and Towata Day, we also brought out the artifacts, but also brought out photographs from those regions, which most of those photographs were also identified from our Fijian families. Okay, again here, these are some of this lady here on the left is Arsena Nakarawa, who is the wife of the president of the Fijian community in Hamilton. So it did not only attract Fijians in Auckland, but also our families in Wellington and Christchurch and also Hamilton came to visit. Now, these are some pictures that I want to show you in terms of the renaming of the artifacts, which kind of confirms that these were the things that we were doing. So this one is a Singamoli. So it used to be just water vessel Fiji. So we were able to give it the Fijian name. Isn't that wonderful? So now they have their indigenous names. Yeah, so this is a Singamoli. And the next one, Singatam Bua. This is in the shape of the whale's tooth. Naka, next one. Sangavonu or Honu. Sanga, a water vessel in the shape of Honu or turtle. Next one. And Kitungele. So what happened with these beautiful images that you've just seen, they were actually identified by some of our knowledge holders. So what we did, we actually invited knowledge holders from the community. So we had Reilala Ngande Ngaunovo, who was a well-known tapa maker from the island of Moa in Laos. She came on board and talked about Masi. We invited Kulaya Wukivea from Tailevu, who came in and talked about mats, because she's a prolific mat weaver. We also invited Master Fotuangambava from the island of Kambara, who are well known for carving. So he came in and talked about the carvings in the collections. And also we had adornments, and Alipate Trail, who is a choreographer, Choana, who is also an artist, were able to contribute to this knowledge base. So now all the information that we had are all recorded on video, on audio, as well as written. So now Fijians all over the world, from the comfort of their living room, they can just type whatever artifacts they want to learn about, boom, they can see it on the screen. So technology has now reduced the divide, but also acknowledging the manner of the information that our knowledge holders brought in to this project. So a huge vinakavakalevu and mahalo to the Auckland Museum. So I think at this point, we would like to play the video for us to watch, which is the conclusion of my presentation.
All right, so let me go ahead and set that up really quickly, and then we will be on our way. Okay. There's no sound yet, so if you're worried about that, that's because there's no sound.
That feeling of coming into this wonderful house that's looking after all our treasures, not just Fiji, but the whole of Pacifica. in this case. I was honored to be asked to be part of this project. And also I came with a hidden motive. I wanted to look at the things to also educate my own family, my own household, that these things were here for them and my grandchildren to come. That, you know, there's a place where they can come and say, yes, this is mine, this belongs to me. The reason why we came up with the name because of the word yao means treasures. So what we see in front of us here, yao and Wakaviti means of Fijian origin. So that's the first part of it, which is Nayao Wakaviti. Naka Marangeti means to something to be treasured, to preserve. I think all encompassed in that is the thought of the future. Yeah? All of these treasures from the past to preserve for the future generations. Yeah, so in a nutshell, Nayao Wakaviti Nakamaringeti can be defined as Fijian treasures that are treasured. I think Auckland Museum is quite the leader in this type of program, because I'm with the old thought of like, you go to a museum, you look, but you're not allowed to see or touch. And you hear of many other treasures that are stored here. And we were told about the program. I thought, wow, we're actually going to get to see all of that? It's like, that's, you know, unheard of. And so, yeah, just the thought of coming in and seeing a lot of these treasures from, when you see it in a book, you read and you learn about it in school, but to actually come and see the objects and like the numbers of them and to actually touch them are just amazing. I know it's quite real honor to be a part of it. And last week, what was interesting was grandparents bringing their grandchildren. And I had a number of emails that came through, was that their little grandchildren just couldn't stop talking the whole night. Even in the car when you were going home, one grandmother said, oh, my little granddaughter keeps saying, oh, so grandma, I'm Fijian. And it was so lovely that the program at the museum validated that part, you know? To know that, you know, they came here and they say, wow, these things takes me back, you know, to my childhood memory here. I've really enjoyed my time here with and just being around all our Fijian treasures. Yeah, it's been such a joy. I think it's there's quite a buzz in the community, and I think Dr. John Jonathan from the Cook Islands, former teacher of mine, he made a comment once that he believed cultural preservation and a lot of this will be led by most islanders who live overseas. And I think that's just being illustrated with this program here, because, so I think it's such a crucial role that we're going to play here. And I think this is going to filter back to the islands. You know, once they see how we've responded and reacted to the program, it's definitely going to, like Joanna mentioned, it's really opened up. A lot of the elderly have said, well, I grew up with this, and then their thoughts are directed to the little ones. Oh, they didn't, you know, they haven't had that experience. So it's going to get them to think, what can I do to help them have the same experience? So I think that's how I know it's been such a really good, good role that is played. Thanks to social media, you know, that are connecting, you know, the whole global Fijian village. And everyone is all part of this, you know, and everyone is talking about it, and it's cutting through all the age group and all the tribes. So, you know, I think the younger Fijians will now be proud to be Fijian because, you know, they're learning more about themselves, and that's a beautiful thing.
Mahalo.
Okay, thank you very much, Tarisi, for that wonderful presentation. And so the last presentation for our first panel is me. And luckily I have the wonderful role of kind of wrapping up and summarizing the presentation. Oh, sorry, I have to. Forgot to exit the YouTube, my apologies. Okay, so let me pull up my presentation and we will go from there. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yes, can see.
Thank you. All right. I want to share some of my thoughts and reflections regarding cultural competency in Hawaii's museums. These thoughts and reflections are from my experiences as a young Native Hawaiian researcher with an interest in Hawaiian museology, as well as my earlier life experiences dabbling in the field of Hawaiian archaeology. Ultimately, what these experiences have afforded me is the opportunity to learn more about some of the issues that continue to divide Hawaii's heritage sector today, issues that I continue to familiarize myself with as I begin a career in nonprofits and heritage resource management. I share these thoughts with you in the hope that they provide concrete methods and lessons for those who work in Hawaii's heritage sector on how to approach, collaborate, and learn from those community members, cultural practitioners, and knowledge holders that we oftentimes rely on as we develop programs, exhibitions, and learn more about the indigenous belongings that we curate within our institutions. Given the short amount of time that I have with you today, I decided to frame this presentation through the use of Olalo No'eau. Olalo No'eau are Hawaiian proverbs and poetical sayings that convey information about a place, a being, or a phenomena. They offer lessons about how to conduct oneself at any given time and how to better understand the environment in which one finds themselves in. Although the Olalo No'eau that I will share today are ones that I learned throughout my lifetime, we are fortunate to have an entire book on these wise sayings that was compiled by Mary Kawena Pukui. So if you haven't checked it out yet, you should definitely look into it. It's a great treasure. And it's a great addition to any library. So when I was a student at Keanola'ahana Public Charter School in Keaukaha, which is on the island of Hawaii, I remember helping my sister, who was then a teacher at Keana, create Olalo No'eau cards that she posted around her classroom. And each of these black and red cards included an Olalo No'eau that she selected and a stamp design that we created using whatever plants were available around our campus. And the purpose of these Olalo No'eau were simple yet effective. They were a constant visual reminder for the students on how to conduct themselves in the classroom. They conveyed lessons through the oral turned written word about Hawaiian values and practices. Likewise, for the purpose of this webinar, we can think of Olalo No'eau as a heuristic device that offer a window into Hawaiian cultural competency. They can also serve as mnemonic devices that remind us of how we need to conduct ourselves and approach others to accomplish our goals. I just entered, and if you could mute yourself, that would be great. Okay, this is the definition of the two different words. So my first Olalo No'eau. Pa'akavaha na nakamaka ho'olohe ka pepeau hana kalima. Keep your mouth shut, your eyes open, your ears listening, and your hands busy. This was one of the first Olalo No'eau that I learned as a Hawaiian immersion student at Kekula Kaiapuni o Keaukaha. Our Kumura teachers would always have this Olalo No'eau posted in their classrooms as a reminder to students on how they should behave. And more broadly, the Olalo No'eau conveys a particular Hawaiian approach to learning that centers mentorship, discipline, and care. It teaches us that before we say anything, we need to first observe and listen with intent. From these lessons, we then begin to do things with our hands. And translated for this webinar, the Olalo No'eau takes on some of these meanings. When reaching out to cultural practitioners, community members, and other knowledge holders, do it with intent. Listen carefully to the issues and concerns that they are raising. Develop outcomes that align with community as well as institutional needs. Secondly, listen and learn from other staff members. Be observant so you and your coworkers recognize each other's strengths and contributions and work strategically with care to create with our lima, our hands, the institutional changes that we seek. A'ole pau ka ike ka halau ho'okahi. All knowledge is not taught in the same school. One can learn from many sources. This olelo no eao is the one that we oftentimes hear because it is a reminder that we each store different forms of knowledge that we have learned from specific teachers, mentors, and elders. It is oftentimes used as an expression of diversity within the Hawaiian community to recognize different lineages of thought, practice, and expression. In 2014, when I was doing research on how Hawaiian chiefly or ali'i collections were curated at the Bernice Poʻahibisha Museum and the Lyman House Memorial Museum, it became apparent to me that those who handled ali'i collections on a day-to-day basis, i.e. the collection managers, some of whom were Native Hawaiian, drew from their cultural knowledge base to inform how they handled and showed respect to these special collections. Whether they were practices under beliefs that they learned through their family or from, for example, a hula halau, collections managers drew from these experiences to critically consider how to properly care for ali'i collections. So from this olelo no ea, we can consider the following. A graduate degree is not a guarantee of someone's work experience and interpersonal skills. It should not be the only measure for considering whether or not someone is hired or receives a promotion within an institution. Second, work experience is derived from multiple experiences beyond just the workplace. So even though there are these skills, these quote unquote professional skills that we acquire through professionalization and through graduate training, those aren't necessarily the only skills that we're drawing from, especially when we're working with community or doing specific things within the collections. Sometimes those experiences come from other schools of knowledge that we've been privy to or have a responsibility to. And lastly, but not least, this olelo no ea is about recognizing that we all come from different lineages of knowledge that we carry with us on an everyday basis and inform the way that we conduct ourselves. So be cognizant of this and thinking about this critically in relation to the practitioners and knowledge holders we collaborate with, as well as museum staff that we interact with on a day-to-day basis is really important. The last olelo no ea that I want to share is I ka olelo no keola, I ka olelo no kamake. Life is in speech. Death is in speech. Words can heal, words can destroy. When I am told this olelo no ea by kumu or teachers or kupuna elders, they remind me of the power of the spoken word. What we say can, and oftentimes do, have material consequences. As an example of this, we're always told stories of kahuna ana ana, which are typically described or defined as priests, with the ability to pray someone to death. It also, sorry, I lost my place. It also makes me think of the mo'olelo of Hi'iaka i Kapolio Pele and how Hi'iaka revives Pele's lover, Lohi'au, through chant and ritual. More recently, historian Noelani Arista has historicized this olelo no ea as one that refers to the authoritative power of the ali'i. Through their oral commands, an individual could be either killed or spared for their transgression. A more recent example of the power of words as it relates to ali'i and museums is the recent transfer of ownership of Kalaniʻopuʻu's ahu'ula in Mahi'ole from the National Museum of New Zealand, Te Papa Tongarewa, to the Bernice Poʻahibisha Museum. The long-term loan that resulted in Kalaniʻopuʻu's return to Hawaii began with in-person conversations between Te Papa staff in Kanaka Maoli, who would pilgrimage to the museum to visit these ancestral belongings. These conversations, years in the making, eventually turned into legal decisions and material outcomes that will continue to inform issues around international repatriation for years to come. Thus, I ka olelo no keola, I ka olelo no kamake allows us to think through cultural competency because it, one, illustrates the power of the spoken word to affect change and transformation, and two, demonstrates the impact that can be made when promises and obligations are fulfilled. And I bring up this second point because one of the issues that institutions and museums and other related places of informal learning experience is a pushback or a sense of not trust, or what's the word? There's a sense when these institutions reach out, especially to the Hawaiian community, to Hawaiian leaders, that it's not a place to be trusted. And part of this issue of trust stems from years and years of broken promises that we continue to have to experience. So I bring this up because as institutions, if we're going to do something or we say we're going to do something, we need to commit and ensure that we have the proper infrastructure and programming in place so that it's a long-term relationship, that we're not just reaching out to these individuals for a single program, but really trying to build relationships with the communities that we come from and that we're situated in, so that we change our institutions to become those places that are an asset to our communities. So to end really briefly, I want to speak directly to cultural competency and what this webinar aims to achieve and what our previous speakers have really highlighted. And as I see it, this is some of the things that I think about with regards to cultural competency. So cultural competency, it means that we have to be able and we have to be willing to have hard conversations within our institution and with those that we want to partner with. We have to be committed to social justice and enacting change within our institutions where we can. Cultural competency also means knowing the history of our institutions and the broader history of the places that we work at. It's about learning how to listen with the intent to enact changes that benefit your workplace and the larger community. It's about listening to the communities we serve and bringing communities into our institutions in ways that are mutually beneficial and productive. It's about being a part of the community that we are situated in. It's about leading by example. And when I say this, I mean, when I was growing up, my parents and my grandparents always used to tell me that, speak less, do more. And through the things that you're doing, you are telling people that you're committed to the work. And people will be inspired by that and would want to partner with you because you're doing the work rather than just saying you are. And lastly, it's about working together across our differences to achieve the common goals that we all aim to achieve through our work. And with that, I am done. So mahalo, everyone. All right, so that was the end of our first presentation. And what we will do is we'll just take a quick 5-minute break. I think that should be well into our schedule. Yep. Oh, I'm sorry. Question and answer. I was a little bit ahead of myself. So if you have any questions for our panelists, feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question. The other option, if you don't want to do that, please send your question to us in the chat option. I wonder if I can highlight speakers. Oh, okay, it's only one person per, okay. Any questions?
I have a question.
Aloha.
Aloha, mahalo nui everyone for this just so important foundational topic that you're discussing. I was interested to know from any one of all of you, what did you find as the most helpful strategy in engaging collaboration within our communities as well as with your discipline and our communities? So what strategies have you found most effective?
Any of our other two presenters have a response?
I'd like to let Tarisi go first.
Yes, I think one of the strategies that we learned from the PK project and even the ones in Fiji and in the Waikato Museum was the first one is really genuinely knowing your people or your community that you're dealing with. And yeah, and I think that kind of applies across, even in the case of Fiji, even though, I was Fijian, I had to really work and try and understand how the community works, because how the Fijians work and the network is different from the Tongan and different from the Samoan and the Kiribati communities. So one is, knowing knowing your community, for example, knowing where they are and where they are based. That was a big learning curve for us in Auckland. When we were presented with 1,500 artifacts, we looked at each other and we were like, where are we going to start and who are we going to shoulder tap? And so the three of us, Chowana, Alipate, and myself, we decided to start with ourselves first. Who in the community do we already know? So that was a really good strategy we applied. So we didn't try to reinvent the wheel. So we worked with what we already know. And so to go another level down was that we strategized individually to say, what is Chowana's strength? What is Alipate's strength? And what is my strength? And then we worked from there. And so that's how, for Chowana, she works very well with the Catholic community. So she decided to take the religious group. So she decided to say, I'm going to go down this path, and work with the people that she knows. And for me and Alipate, we work, maybe I'll speak for me first before Alipate. For me, I kind of very familiar with the 3 confederacies. I kind of told them, hey, we have 14 provinces and Rotuma, which is 15. We can't deal with that. It's too many. Let's work with what we can manage to do. And then we found out that we had 3 representatives of the confederacies living in Auckland. So it was a big eye-opener, for all of us to know, wow, this is what the Fijian community actually look like, and work with it. The third one with Alipate, because he's much younger than us, I'm sure when he listens to this, he'll be very much smiling, because he always say that he's the baby of the group. Of course he's a baby. He worked with the youths, the young voices. And so that was the strategy, my sister, that we used, and it worked really well. We were able to get those 3,000 plus Fijians to come through the door. If we didn't apply that, we wouldn't have had a very successful time at the Auckland Museum. So that's briefly what we did. Yeah.
And Helen?
I think more generically that what Tarisi gave her account of is just so, it's the ideal strategy. And more generically than that is that I always try to encourage people who represent the repository, whether it be a museum or an archives, is that do not come with the attitude that you know everything. And too often that's where they go, oh yeah, well look what we have, and it's, aren't you impressed? And that comes across so many times. And so it's asking it's somebody I know who said, they keep asking and asking and asking for my mana'o, and what do I get out of it? They go off and do their exhibit, and they go off and do it, and all the accolades, the published articles in peer-reviewed journals are all going to them. So that's a strategy that always makes sure that those people that you're relying on, the community of that culture, is compensated somehow and recognized. And I don't mean like, oh, here's a lei, that's it. Compensation. Recognize that the knowledge that they have is so important. You couldn't do it without them. You're getting, so that's it.
I would just add something really shortly that for me, one of the earlier projects I did when I was much younger was try to do a photo day in our community, where we invited kupuna to just bring what they have and to share stories. But at the same time, I was really fortunate to be friends and colleagues with the folks at Lyman Museum, and they came with some of their collections of unknown hilo photos and some of the photos of individuals. They came with the binder and the information that they had, and they just brought it out for the kupuna to look through. And I mean, that example is really stressing the importance of our institutions going out to community events, accepting the invitation when we receive it, and making our resources available and letting folks know, this is what we have. What can we do with it? What are the strategies that we can use? that makes such a difference. I remember one of my aunts, after that experience, she thought of the Laimi Museum as a completely different place because they've never went to the museum. There was no purpose to go. But now that they have, and now that they know, or at that time, they could see the people behind the institution and their willingness to come out into community really changed the perception and opened up new avenues for collaboration. So that's one of the things that I love to see, is when we're actively going out of our own spaces and into the community to say, hey, this is what we do. This is what we hope to do. What are the things that you want us to do? What can we do to serve you? And that can just lead to wonderful things. So
Can I just add something, Helena? Real quick. This is Cal George, Hula Preservation Society. Just coming from a Ko'olaupoka Hawaiian Civic Club members' point of view, we get a lot of people that come to the Civic Club that immediately just want to talk to our elders and ask them questions right away. But the thing that's worked that I've seen some people do is they'll come to the meetings, they'll not really talk about what they do for a living or anything, but they'll actively participate. And then people get to know them. And then they're like, oh, I do this and I'm doing this project. And then the kupuna or the elders, the community is more keen to participate when they know your face, yeah, and they've spent some time with you.
Yes, absolutely. Mahalo. All right, so I just checked the time, and what I'd like to do is we'll end our Q&A for the first panel. If you have any other questions, please feel free to send it to us here, or perhaps reach out to us over email, and we'd love to respond.